I have today with us Gwenda Lambert, and she is a wellness health expert, but she concentrates on an area that's difficult for a lot of people in different parts of their lives. And that has to do with handling grief, and something even more involved over life is emotional intelligence and how that all affects us each. Gwenda, could you tell us a little bit at first about what got you started in what you're doing and why your heart is in this so much and what you are trying to accomplish for people? What is the benefits of working with you? Thanks, Gwenda.
That's a great question. The reason I got involved was it's always our mother's fault. My mother was a gerontology nurse. And so we were very death friendly in our family, as well as experiencing quite a bit of death. By the time I was 20, I knew 17 people that had died. And so one of the things that I continued on with my life doing was I was that person that would talk to people about end of life things, but I didn't want to get involved in death and dying. Nobody wants to talk about that. And then again, I worked as a Make-A-Wish wish granter. And one of the top skills I think that came there is that, excuse me, is that when I'm talking to one of the parents, they could talk about the fact that their child had cancer and I wouldn't flinch and I would just listen, because that's really what we need to do more of as humans is listen. And our challenge to be able to be present when there's really strong feelings like sadness and anger and what comes along with grief. So I came across the grief recovery method, which is an education program that allows you to not go in. Normally in a therapeutic standpoint, you would go in because you think something's wrong and you need to fix something. Even now with the pathologizing of grief, like you have to be, over it. You have to be over it in 6 months. There is no timeline for grief. There's a lot of misinformation. And in most of the clients that I work with, it's just in the first education part that they get so many ahas that say, you mean I'm allowed to be angry at that person who died? You're allowed to feel whatever you feel. It's just the difference of being able to, with myself, I've had a lot of different experiences. Loss is not just death. I've had a lot of different kinds of losses. So I hold space. I'm not going to flinch when there's heavy emotions. And that allows us human to build emotional resilience, right? And to become better listeners and to become less anxious about losses. We are all grievers as of right now, and all losses are experienced at 100%. Yet a lot of times we don't think that we can handle the emotional component of actually observing our grief. So that's what I do is I stand beside you. I'm not going to do the work. It's a simple process. It's a set of tools that you can then take on for the rest of your life, because we will continue to have losses.
Basically, by listening very intently, you're able to empathize with the person and show your understanding of where they're coming from and empathize with them. The emotional intelligence is something that we all could use a bit of education on, because it's every day. And the more aware of that factor, the better we can relate with everyone around us. So when you're listening to someone, you're getting a different perspective a lot of times. And to be able to understand each other, you have to be open to listening to different perspectives, even on the same topic, and give it time to think and mull over, as some people might say.
Mm-hmm.
I bet there's some enjoyment in it, in finding joy, when you can find that and remember the times of joy, of an experience you had with each other in life, because the things to think about when someone passes on. Personal experience, my father used to talk to my younger brother when he's very young about life passages, that it's just another life passage. It's no big deal. Everyone goes through it. I'm always going to be there with you in the sense that I love you. And that mattered to a young person when you're going to, the father knows he's not going to be around within a year, and to be able to step up and let the children know that it's a life passage. So that's part, I think, of how you educate people, but you've got a much deeper knowledge on this whole topic, and you've run into so many people with differences of how they handle grief, for instance. Do you have a story or two at all that you could share without giving names, but the things that you've experienced where you really came to the front of helping them get through something?
Exactly. Here's the great thing is all of our relationships are unique. So all of our grief experiences are unique. And one of the most profound, I loved how you talked about your father would call it life passage. It's no big deal. So I would even change that language to be life passage. It's part of our process. It's part of the process of living is dying. So that it's acknowledged that it can be a big deal. When you love somebody, it's the price of love. Yet with our death phobic society, one of the clients that I worked with, her father died when she was around 11 years old. And this is a really big developmental point in life. And
Yes.
she was talking to me at 32, and she had some failed relationships. And there was some other things that instead we think we're broken. We think there's something wrong with us. Going through this process, and this is a common thing that we say to our children, we don't want to use the D word. We don't want to mention death. So what happens instead is your father's left us. Now you're trying to soften the words, but it doesn't soften anything. So at 32, in the middle of this process, she goes, when my father left, and it's okay, I just need to stop you. Your father didn't leave. He died. He didn't abandon you. And watching the awareness on her face, and that changed everything, because that little girl heard that he had left her, not that he died. And this is where, if us as adults, if we can't say the D word, if we can't be around emotions like anger, sadness, angst, if we can't feel those emotions and let them go through us and not absorb them, and to be able to hold space for somebody when they feel, that doesn't help as they turn into adults for kids. And we are also another client that I was just working with recently. She had her grandmother die, her father die, and one of her friends met an untimely death, and I'll just leave it at that. And so when we were working with her, one of the comments that she made, because when we have a death that's sudden, death is always going to be hard. It's always going to be, I would like to see a world where we have clean deaths, where we have said what we need to say during life. So we know that we love each other, and not unlike your story about your brother, having that time, even if you know it's limited time, and being able to let, especially a child, but an adult, when you have somebody on their deathbed saying, is there anything you want to tell me? And then you get people going, I don't want to take away their death experience. It's like, no, they're offering you a gift sometimes. Maybe they weren't as clear in life. Maybe you didn't have as honest communications as you wanted to. If somebody's offering you that opportunity, take it, because then you get to say, this really pissed me off, but this, I loved you when we did this, right? Because we're human. So the one thing that she said was basically, I wake up in the morning and I go, is gravity going to work today? Because the rug has been completely pulled out from underneath you in these sudden deaths. And and that is just how it feels. And that's why there is anxiety. It doesn't mean you have an anxiety disorder because you get, oh my God, what's going on in my world? It doesn't mean that you have depression because you're sad. It just means that it's an emotionally heavy time.
These are incredibly important educational points that you're making. I understand that you really deliver an educational type of program to help people, if I'm explaining this right, to help people help themselves where they can self-educate, but you need to get them to that point. It's kind of like this person that you just mentioned, it's kind of like you helped her change her whole attitude, which changed her whole perspective of life and goodness and starting to think in more positive terms. And that just extrapolates out there to everything that she does in the future, doesn't it?
Well, and with the woman, the first woman, she
Mhm.
was having these challenges in her relationships because we as a child process that, okay, our dad left, so other men are going to leave. And this is all the psychology part of this. But sometimes we don't need to have somebody. And how do you feel about that? Therapy is great. Psychology is great. All that stuff really works. But a lot of times we're just humans. We need to know that we're loved, accepted. There's communications that maybe we wish we had said more, better, or different. So all we need to do is be seen and heard. And then we just give a process that's very specific to the way we communicate those undelivered emotional expressions.
Well, I really like your educational methods of going about a very tough subject because it isn't putting anything on the person. And sometimes going to a therapist, sometimes a therapist has to pull them out of feeling something that they said that triggered them. And now they're really losing it. It certainly lets all the emotion out, but is it really good or is it not? Are you focused on the right things? Therapists have their place in this whole thing. But I think just starting with education before there's trouble that comes your way and being proactive about it a little bit will really help every member of the family uh, coalesce, so to speak, on that very thing in life. And whether this is getting hit by a truck or dying in your sleep from old age, it's still going to happen one way or another. But the truth I think that you'll agree with is when somebody dies was totally unexpected, that it's like running into a wall. It's just so overwhelming
Mhm.
that this is something that I think you definitely can help with if people have a little bit more education about these things and look into it a little bit. How do people get a hold of you and what would they expect in having a talk with you?
Well, I am at Gwenda Connects on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and I have a web page right now as well that you can sign up for a what to say or what not to say to somebody who's grieving. So that would be how you would get in touch with me. You could set up a call through gwendaconnects.com because there's a link there to set up a call with me. So I offer the grief recovery method online. We have a pet loss program because pets can be as important as humans to a lot of people. And the other thing is they also hold space because they are unconditional. So they sometimes act as holding space for the rest of our world, which may be a little crazy because sometimes human to human conversation, it's not so fun. So what happens, we have an 8-week online group program, and it's really great to work with groups. We do small groups. And I co-facilitate with somebody who has a different life experience than I do, because the one thing we want to show you is, as you said, we're all grievers. 100% of us are grievers, whether or not we call it that. In fact, there's a lot of diagnoses, I think, that are thrown around because we're not taking into account the fact that I'm really just processing something from years ago that I didn't have the time or emotional energy or knowledge to be able to do. And so that 8-week program, it helps you talk with other people. Then the third option is that you can do it, of course, one-on-one. And then we also have a Helping Children with Loss program, which is how we anticipate. And again, none of this, I am not a child psychologist. I'm not any kind of psychologist or therapist, but we anticipate what the children may or may not be thinking. What are some of the things that might come up? Because children are much cleaner in a lot of ways, because they ask those questions like, what does death mean? And we as adults, sometimes we don't have the bandwidth to be able to answer them in a complete way. So hopefully by taking any of these courses, they'll allow you as an individual to look at what you believe first, and then to be able to honor these relationships that we have in our life. That maybe just because you're going back to work in 6 weeks doesn't mean that your grief is over. We have bereavement policies that don't even last long enough to get past the funeral and dealing with all the family and dealing with all the emotional aspect of that. So that's the number of ways.
That sounds like a great group in the sense that you might be able to pull things out that actually in life might actually be what is holding you back from certain things. And when you have a little bit of self-discovery, if that's what comes out of having a private group where everyone is helping each other in a very secure way, that's incredible. That could change lives and change the direction of things, and also how each person in the family, young or old, are able to, you could say, just be on the same page as far as having a good attitude about life and not looking at it any other way, having that positive attitude and getting the most out of life. So part of what you're doing really is settling these tough questions in a way that if they do need to go to a therapist, which you told me you would recommend for people at times, but it's just the right time when it's really needed, that they're there to get people through. But you can really uncover a lot and talk to people way before anything actually happens. If people just spend a little bit of time to get their bearing about that part of life, things are just going to be that better for everyone. We'll include the contact information at the end so people have it there as well. And I want to thank you for enlightening us today with this particular touchy subject, but it's part of life, isn't it? Thank you so much, Gwenda.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.